Hi, this is Rabbi Adam Law. Today we're going to make a video exploring the Parsha this week. And the Parsha this week is called Parshas Pinchas. We're going to speak about the daughters of Selofhad, but not so much about them specifically, but more about their father and what happened there. In chapter 27, the daughters of Selofhad come near to Moshe, and he gives their names, Machla, Noah, Hagah, Milcha, and Tirza. And they stood before Moshe, and they wanted to know, they said, our father died in the wilderness, but he was not among the assembly that was gathering against Hashem in the assembly of Korach, meaning he wasn't part of that group. And he died of his own sin, and he had no sons. And they wanted to know, because normally the laws of inheritance for tribal land is that it goes to the sons. So what if there are no sons? So who gets his portion? And here we know that Moshe goes to Hashem and inquires, and in the end we see that the daughters can, in the case where there are no sons, get a tribal portion. But we're going to focus on the incident of Selofhad and what was going on versus with him and Moshe particularly. So, a few interesting things you notice in the Parsha is, one is it says he died in the wilderness, and then it says he died for his own sin. The people in the incident of Korach, they weren't going to be there. But what about somebody else who sinned, who died? Should they be allowed for their tribal portion to go on? And also the fact there were no sons. So should the daughters be able to? So the Gemara notices this. In Gemara Shabbos 96b, we find this following thing. At the end of the page, the rabbis taught in a brisa, there was a person in Parshas Shalach who, after the incident of the spies, he was gathering wood. And he was called the Makoshesh. In this Gemara, it teaches that this person was Selofhad. Because it says, in the wilderness, the Israelites were in the wilderness and they found a man gathering wood. That's what it says over there. And we know here from in our Parsha, Parshas Pinchas, that he died for his own sin, it says. And therefore, the Gemara connects with the word wilderness, midbar, with midbar. In both places, it says wilderness. He was gathering wood in the wilderness. And here, it says by the daughters of Selofhad, it says their father died in the wilderness. So we learn here there's a connection. And this is Rabbi Akiva, whose opinion is brought here. And Rabbi Yehuda attacks this a little bit, says this is a problem, but nevertheless, there's this idea that it was Selofhad. That the daughters of Selofhad were the daughters of the Makoshesh. Selofhad was the Makoshesh. He was the one who was gathering wood in the wilderness. And on Shabbos, we're not allowed to do malacha. And they say that the gathering wood could have been a couple of different problems. The Gemara says. It says one could be transferring. You're not allowed to transfer objects. Another one is gathering, ma'amer. You're not allowed to gather a bunch of disparate things and put them together. So the question is which one of these were. So there's an interesting idea brought here in the Sefer, Meha Shaloach, by Rabbi Mordechai Yosef of Ishbitz. Moshe brought the complaint, the situation of the Bnos Selofhad, these daughters, before Hashem to judge the situation. That first, before it was brought to Hashem, the Midrash in Tanchuma says it went through steps. First, it was brought to, it doesn't seem to be something that Moshe needs to deal with. First, it was brought to the tens, the leader of tens, and then the leader of hundreds. And then it went up and up and up. It could have been answered as well. It could have been answered by somebody on a lower level. He says here is because Moshe Rabbeinu had a personal stake in this. We know that tzaddik, the righteous person, is called Shabbos. A regular person on Shabbos is like the tzaddik during the week. So the tzaddik is like Shabbos. He's always in the level of Shabbos, where he's so connected with love and fear and connection to Hashem. And Moshe Rabbeinu, who is the paradigm tzaddik, the righteous person, which we've learned the whole idea of being a tzaddik from him. This righteous man, Moshe, was the bechina of Shabbos. He was Shabbos. So therefore, when Selofhad sinned against Shabbos by breaking Shabbos, he actually, in a way, sinned against Moshe. He sinned against Moshe. It was personally connected to Moshe. That's why the Tanchuma said it had to be brought to Moshe, because the lower level guys, the lower level judges, couldn't deal with such a situation. Moshe was someone who had a personal stake in it. Now, the Mea Shloach goes on to say that we know from the Gemara that if the Yidden keep 2 Shabboses, that if everyone keeps 2 Shabboses, that will be great for all the Jewish people and will instantly get to the Messianic era. So it's a very important thing. And the Slavchad, this was the second Shabbos from when they had been commanded. And if they had kept the Shabbos, this guy Slavchad broke Shabbos and he ruined it for everybody. Normally, it's good for a person to be mavir al midosav, for a person to let go of their attributes, to say, okay, I'm going to let go in this particular circumstance. But Moshe didn't know if he could do this because it was related to Shabbos. It was related to a much bigger concept. Shabbos is really the basis of Jewish existence. The whole week flows into Shabbos, and the next week flows after Shabbos. And how could Moshe, and we see it was so important, and Safchad basically blew it for everybody. Because if they had kept the second Shabbos, then everything would have been okay, and we would have gone to the Messianic era. So Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know, even though he was personally very humble, more humble than any other man, he didn't know whether he could, in this particular circumstance, let go and be Mavir al Midosav. The Gemara Yuma on page 23a speaks about whether a righteous person should be Mavir al Midosav. And there's a very interesting, almost shocking teaching here. Rabbi Yochanan says, in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehotzadak, Kol Talmud Hacham she'enu nokein v'noter kanachash enu Talmud Hacham. Any rabbi, any Talmud Hacham, any tzaddik who does not bear a grudge and does not have revenge like a snake would is not a Talmud Hacham. And of course, this is very troubling when we see this, because we know that it's usur, it's actually the 10 commandments that you're not supposed to hold a grudge or have revenge. So how could this possibly be? So one answer is they say that a Talmud Hacham, that the tzaddik, is somebody who brings God's light in this world. Like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, there's someone who brings God's light in this world, and therefore he represents something bigger. So therefore, it's not about him. Hopefully the tzaddik has completely erased his own sense of self. He's bittul. He's got a level of ayin, of nothingness. But yet he must still, for Hashem's honor, not allow himself to be degraded in this manner. Therefore, he has to do some sort of act of revenge or a grudge. Now, that's still very troubling. The Gemara tries to give a few answers to this. First, it says, it's only in cases of money are we forbidden to take a grudge or have revenge. But in case of personal suffering, that's something else. Meaning is, when the Torah says in the 10 Commandments you're not allowed to have revenge or grudge, it's only talking about, for the tzaddik, for the righteous person, a matter of money, of monetary. He's not allowed to go and, have revenge or grudge in the case of money. But for his own personal suffering, that's different. And the Gemara still attacks that as well. That still seems too much. You're saying every time a guy is personally hurt, he's allowed to have revenge? Anyway, the Gemara says, no, he's not allowed to do anything active. But he should keep it in his mind. He should have it present in his mind and not let go of what the person did to him. And therefore, but he may not do an active act of revenge or a grudge. But what he may do is, at a time where the other person's in a difficult circumstance, he maybe will not act on it, and he will passively bear a grudge based on the personal suffering that he received from the other person, or take revenge based on that. But he can't actively do it. Even in a case of personal suffering, the Talmud Hacham, the tzaddik, cannot do so. Of course, we see that this is not necessarily happening for every person. A lot of people have heard about the argument between Rabbi Kook and Rabbi Sonnenfeld. And of course, when it comes to the great tzaddikim like Rabbi Kook and Rabbi Sonnenfeld, usually the argument is really among the Kanaim, the people who follow them. The tzaddikim themselves, you're not really supposed to investigate why different rabbis are arguing and why it seems like they don't get along. But it's usually their followers who feel very zealous for their rabbanim, for their masters, that they're the ones who hype it up. So anyway, the followers of Rabbi Sonnenfeld give Rabbi Kook, the chief rabbi of Israel, a lot of trouble. And he was suffering all the time for it. But Rabbi Kook had a lot of connections. And eventually, unfortunately, the daughter of Rabbi Sonnenfeld got sick. And he knew that Rabbi Kook had connections with all of the best doctors. And they went to Rabbi Kook to ask for help. And Rabbi Kook gladly gave it to him. So the question was asked to Rabbi Kook afterwards, well, after all the suffering that the camp of Rabbi Sonnenfeld did to you, why are you helping him out? And Rabbi Kook, in his humble way, said, I won't have anything to do with that. I'm not going to, what does his attack against me have anything to do with me helping him and his daughter out? It has nothing to do with it. Meaning is, he maybe had the opportunity to talk about what this Gemara is talking about here. He could have just passively not acted to help out. But he didn't have to act on this. But apparently, according to this Gemara, it is within the possibility of a Talmud Chacham to bear a grudge and revenge when it comes to personal suffering that was caused to you. But it can't be in a direct manner. It could be in a passive way. Nevertheless, many great rabbis and tzaddikim would never follow this idea that's brought here, and they would still act as we see Rabbi Kook did. So the Ishbitzer, the Meir Shloach, goes on to speak more about this, and he says, well, what's the real difference? He says, the difference is this. Again, as we said, the Talmud Chacham, the rabbi, represents spirituality, represents God's presence, so to speak, in this world. And therefore, money, that's just a temporary thing. We know money comes and goes. You can't really tell whether someone lost money or had money. But when it comes to physical suffering, that shows on the body, and it leaves a roshem. It leaves a type of blemish on the person. Right? So therefore, Moshe, back to our story here, Moshe himself was doubtful about whether he could be like Rabbi Kook and be Ma'avir al Midosav and just let go of the suffering that happened to him. Because he knew how important this idea of Shabbos was. For him, his body was Shabbos. He was the aspect of Shabbos. So he was unsure about whether he could do that or not, whether he could let go. And that's why B'nai Slavchad went to Moshe, and none of the lower level judges would be good enough. And in the end, he forgave Slavchad enough to be able to, for Hashem to work through him, to pass on the judgment that the B'nai Slavchad could get the money. Because he realized, though, that even though that Shabbos was blemished and that second Shabbos was not kept, nevertheless, for the long term, Shabbos was not blemished. And it was considered just a blemish of money, and not a blemish of the goof. He didn't have that type of physical suffering because we know the concept of Shabbos can never be destroyed. That it was the reason he could forgive Slavchad and therefore B'nai Slavchad and to give them their portion was because that it was only a matter of monetary loss, meaning a temporary loss that would just go away. The light of Shabbos could not be diminished in any way. And so therefore, it's not like a bodily loss. When someone loses something in their body, it makes a permanent blemish. This was only a monetary blemish, and therefore he felt he could be forgiven. On a side note, and an interesting Torah related to that, is the idea that actually, that Ishbitzer talks about this in many places, but others do as well, that Shabbos, when Slavchad broke Shabbos, in a way, like all the sins that were found in the Torah, he did it for the team. Because he let us know how serious Shabbos is. We have to understand and take it to our heart how serious Shabbos is and how important it is to honor Shabbos and to fear Shabbos, to honor it and guard it. And therefore, even though he sinned, in a way, it was a good thing, so to speak, because we learned how important Shabbos was. And here, Moshe Rabbeinu, who was Shabbos, he decided that this was not going to be a permanent blemish on Shabbos, rather the light of Shabbos would always continue. Thank you for watching my video this week, and I hope you have a good Shabbos in this Parshas of Pinchas. Thank you and be well. This is Rabbi Adam Ball.